All right. Welcome, everyone. Thank you all for joining us here today. Looks like we've got quite a crowd joining us here, and that is really nice. I am Jim Elvidge with the Human Potential Project, and in just a few moments, our founder, Chris Majer, will be joining us. He will be talking about the Elite Performance Program and how it can help you enhance or reshape your career. It looks like we've got lots of people signed in and still signing in from all over the country. That's great. While Chris is talking us through the webinar, I'll be monitoring the question box and taking some notes and gathering up some of the representative questions you all may have so we can add them to our Q&A. And Chris will be addressing those questions at the end of the webinar. We apologize in advance if your question doesn't get addressed, but we will be limited on time, so we will get to as many as we can. And just so everyone is clear, this webinar is about you and your career. This isn't just a long sales pitch. So to get the most of this webinar, you'll want to take some notes and be sure you have some capacity to do that. Eliminate any distractions, and when you're ready, let's begin. I see that Chris is actually on the line, and I think he's waiting on us. So I'd like to introduce Chris Majer. He's the best-selling author of The Power to Transform, Power, Passion, and Purpose in Daily Life. He's the founder of the Human Potential Project and hp2online.com. So, without further ado, let's get started. Chris, are you there?
I am.
All right. Well, Chris, take it away and let's hear what you have to say.
All right. Thanks, Jim. Welcome, everybody. Glad you could all join us today. And as Jim said, at least at a quick glance, looks like we got people from, all over the country. That's great. Well, obviously the topic for today is you and your career. And what we're going to look at is a whole host of issues and conversations and concerns around the phenomenon of career. And then, of course, talk about how our new Elite Performance Program can help you as you're going through career change, as you're looking to enhance your career, and as you want to move yourself forward in your career. In particular, what we're going to do is look at why this whole topic of career is important in the first place. There's more to it than just, I want to make money. So we want to look and see, why is this an important conversation? And that's going to take us to really understanding what is a career. You'll be surprised to learn that many people don't actually understand the difference between a career and a job. We're going to look at some of the tectonic forces at play that are reshaping the work world and therefore, of course, the career world. We're going to show you how we as HP2 have earned the right to talk about careers. And then we're going to move into the phenomenon of what we call authentic learning. And the basic premise here is simple. If you want to change yourself and enhance your career, you have to learn. Learn and change in our world are synonyms. You can't learn if you don't change, and you won't change if you don't learn. Problem is, how do we do that? Then we're going to look at what's the promise of the Elite Performance Program. What is actually that we are saying it's going to do for you. We'll show you the structure of the program. And then we'll get into a little bit of Q&A. As Jim said, he's going to be looking at representative questions. I'm sure we'll have more questions than we do time. And then finally, we'll look and see about what it's going to take to get you started on the program. So with that, let's get going. So let's look. Why is this conversation important? What is this? What's the big deal about career? And our basic opening statement is pretty simple. You're all here because you're not satisfied with the current status of your career. How do we know that? Because if you were, you wouldn't be here. It's not really that complex. Now, there's a whole bunch of reasons that you might be unsatisfied. You might feel stuck. You might be generally unsatisfied, restless, bored. You may want to earn more money, get a promotion, or you're thinking about moving to another company. You might be afraid of getting laid off or of simply becoming obsolete. Then on the other hand, there's those of you who really just want to contribute more to your organization, learn how to make bigger difference in yourselves, in your lives, in your organizations. Those of you who fall into this category are the ones that are committed to continuous learning, and you always want to continuously develop yourselves. If any of those sounds familiar, then the good news is you've come to the right place. Now, we don't have a lot of time today, so we're going to cover a lot of ground quickly. Let's start with the basic question. What is a career? Right? Now, on the face of it, it seems like a simple question, but when you think about it, what is it that we're really talking about? What do we mean when we say this term career? Here's what we're going to put out as kind of our basic claims about it. A job and a career are not the same thing. Point number one. Number two, that you have a series of jobs doesn't mean you have a career. And the lack of understanding the true nature of a career is likely, not necessarily always, but likely at the root of much of the either upset, unsettledness, or disillusionment that you may or are experiencing. All right, so that's great, but what is it? So in our view, a career is a declaration of your intention to take care of some concern that exists in the world. So in the end, the career isn't so much about you, it's about what's the world need? What's the world need that you can take action to take care of? I'll show you there's a list here of potential careers or examples of careers. I don't need to read it because you're all perfectly capable of reading, but you can see these are all pretty simple, generic, and things that you're familiar with. What matters is that while you can have jobs in any of these areas, what makes it a career is that you dedicate your life, time, and energy in developing your competence and your capacity to move effectively inside this chosen arena. Inside this conversation of career, we watch people suffer for different reasons, but here's kind of some of the main ones. First of all, is there's some people who have no concept of a career. They may have jobs, but the notion of a career, of really dedicating myself to taking care of something in the world, doesn't even occur to them. This produces over time a certain sense of emptiness, all right, as there's this incapacity to make any correlation between what I'm doing and some sort of purpose in my life. On the other hand, other people have many careers. They bounce from career to career, but never really stay in any one place long enough to deeply develop their competence. Then we find, particularly in this country, those that spend most of their lives getting ready, right? They're going to take one more course or do one more degree or do one more this or one more that. So they're always getting ready, but never really get into action in the world. And then finally, there are the daydreamers who confuse dreams of success with having a career. So there's always the grand vision, the big story of what they're going to do, but they never take action to bring any of these things to life. Now, to be clear, our elite performance program isn't necessarily targeted to specifically address any or all of these things. It's looking at who's the who are the you that you need or want to be to change yourself, to enhance your career, to make a difference in the world. So with that in mind, having now quickly, admittedly, shaped a conversation about what do we mean when we talk about career, let's look at what's going on in the world that's shaping the whole global marketplace for work, workers, organizations, and what it portends for your future. So the central thing we want to look at here is, over the last 100 years, we have been living through the period in human history where we have seen the most rapid amount of innovation and change. So if you look pretty much in every sector of any economy, so there's agriculture, aviation, transportation or automobiles, telephones, communications in general, manufacturing, construction, medicine, publishing. It really doesn't matter. We could keep going. The point of this is that we've seen 100 years of innovation in literally every sector of the economy except one, and that is the fundamental way that we think about work, the phenomenon of management, and ergo, our careers. The dilemma we see is that we're pretty much stuck in what we're going to call the industrial era way of seeing the world. Most of what we consider modern management practices and theories, which means the way we think about work and careers, were literally invented by people who were born in the 1800s. They were designed to be effective with the then emerging industrial era of Henry Ford and his peers. Now remember, in those days, work primarily meant tilling the fields or making things with your hands. So the early production workers were literally unskilled, unsophisticated, uneducated, and worked out of survival. There was no social safety net in those days, and literally, if you didn't work, you didn't eat. Now, To understand this a little more deeply and understand where this is going, we've got to understand a little bit more about the industrial era. This was a world of relative stability and predictability. Time and distance were constant barriers to communication and commerce. National boundaries defined markets. Industries were vertically integrated. Henry Ford was really the master of this, the Rouge River plant, where they'd literally bring in train car loads of iron ore on one end and cars would come out the other. Right? The companies operated on what was then called, or we still can refer to as a build and sell model, which basically said, we'll design and build the products and tell you, the customer, what you need or want to buy. Everything in those days was geared to enable industrial mass production, and the key value generators were factory production workers. That's the industrial era. Now, out of that came a way of thinking about work, workers, and careers that frankly kind of haunts us to this day. Now, if you go into any organization and you look in the HR manuals, you will not find any of this written down anywhere, but it's sort of the underlying belief system that sets all these things in motion. So we see that in general, people tend to think of work as drudgery. Nobody would do it if they didn't have to. People are therefore renting their bodies to a company, which means they can use the carrot and stick as motivation. They, of course, have to be compensated for this sacrifice. Everybody needs to be treated equally, and since they don't really want to be here, you can't trust them, and thus the need for constant supervision. And if you see the little picture there, looking at what work was like in those days, you can kind of understand some of that. Now, flash forward 100 years. We're no longer living in the industrial era. We have entered a new historical era, and for the most part, everybody's missed it. Right? The era that we're now stepping into is what we call the coordination era. And the central claim here is the game of business is really no longer about mass production and economies of scale, the hallmarks of the industrial era. It's about your capacity for rapid coordination and mobilization of competence, information, and resources to attend to constantly changing customer concerns. It's a whole different world. Now, this different world requires an entirely new type of corporate culture, structure, and talent, none of which we're going to address today. We call this new type of organization the coordination company, and that's the part that's important because literally everybody listening here today, I'm going to say, is a coordination worker, right? The primary value generators today are coordination workers, not industrial production workers. Now, to get maximum productivity and generate satisfaction in coordination workers requires a completely new approach to leadership management and career development. Now, the point here is that most companies are still blind to this. They're still operating on antiquated HR theories, models, and beliefs. We've got very, very slow thinking going on in most boardrooms about where value gets generated. So each of you individually, are going to be out ahead in this career conversation way farther than where most companies are. Now, here's why we say all these things need to change. We're talking about you. So unlike your grandparents for sure, maybe even your parents, who were industrial era workers, or at least grew up in that mentality, coordination workers are educated, sophisticated, agile, mobile, innovative, and creative. You generate value not so much by making things, but by your effective coordination with others to generate customer satisfaction. It's a whole new world. And importantly, because of all the social safety nets and your education and your sophistication, you're not driven by survival, but instead three completely different drivers: autonomy, mastery, and purpose. Right? A little bit more on each of those. Now, because you're educated, you don't really need or like people standing over your shoulder all day telling you what to do. Management as supervisions. Well, that's one of the central tenets of the industrial era. This is not to say that you all want to sit in a little office either at home or someplace and work by yourselves. That's not it. We don't mean isolation, but autonomy in that you're largely self-generating. You don't need constant supervision. You're interested in mastery. In part, that's why you're here. You want to continually develop yourself so you can make a difference in the world. And importantly, this whole notion of purpose is important to you, right? We all want what we do to matter. We want to be up to something. Now, here's our dilemma. Industrial era thinking not only does not recognize these drivers, it typically demeans them as the dreaded touchy-feely stuff. Now, we're going to say that this is a potentially fatal blindness for many organizations, and it's the reason many people are deeply dissatisfied with their careers and go and actually leave big companies to work in either smaller companies or start little companies on their own. The summary is, looks like we got here just in time because no doubt many of you are in the grips of this very dilemma that we're pointing to. Now, in the industrial era, workers were as interchangeable as the parts on Henry Ford's cars because they de-skilled the work and made it easy to do, which is to say, you could spend all day putting bolts on the wheels of a Model T. If you didn't want to do that, that's fine. We got 100 people standing outside who will. That was one of the hallmarks of how they made the industrial era work. We de-skilled all the work. Well, that's not the way the world is today. Right? In the coordination era, technology is the driving force, and the planet is literally the market. Now, the dilemma with that is that as a result, what were once valuable skills like computer, program writing, or coding, accounting, customer service have now become commoditized and are provided by low-cost countries who are constantly competing to see who can offer these services at the lowest possible price. So what used to be $150 an hour computer software writing jobs, you can go to get done in the Philippines for $5 an hour. That's not going to change. So what this means is that as you're thinking about enhancing career, you want to think more about who and how you want to be as opposed to what you want to do. I'll say it again, who and how you want to be as opposed to what you want to do. Because in the coordination era, being has more enduring value than doing. Right? We can't outsource being. When you think about it, put yourselves in the shoes of leaders and managers in organizations today. What are they looking for when they go to hire people? Well, everybody's going to have a great resume. Otherwise, we wouldn't, get into the screening process in the first place. So it's not just a great resume, but how do you present and carry yourself matters in the organization. Do you have some sense of presence about you? Can you communicate and coordinate effectively with others on the team? Do you know how to take effective action? Do you show some leadership potential? Can you learn quickly and embrace the process? And you aren't afraid of change. Things that are really important then all swirl around this notion of, can you stay calm when things get crazy? You all have jobs, you know it, things get crazy. Well, if you have the capacity to move in all of these ways, that's what we're referring to when we talk about a different way of being. And that's what this elite performance program is all about. You put that all together and then you've developed this capacity that's essential. We could call it either self-generation or self-management, but you know how to move and manage yourself. That's what makes you attractive to an employer. Now, we've looked at and helped shape careers of thousands of people over the years, and that's how we've built this elite performance program. And before I go farther, I just want to be clear with people. We've actually got two versions of this. There's a men's version and a women's version. I do the men's version. One of our senior trainers, Sarah, does the women's version. So we've been able to speak in two different voices here in essentially the same program. And the reason that we say we're qualified to talk about this has to do with our own history. So just to summarize before we go into detail, we're not a bunch of folks who took some weekend seminar on how to be a coach or any of that kind of silliness. We've been at this for 30 years. We have a robust body of work, and we've got something I think important to say in terms of where we come from. So to be clear, we're not from the Human Resources Department. We in fact started out in a very different arena. We come from the world of performance. We started in the early 80s in Seattle, working exclusively with athletes. Our original mission was very simple. We were going to work with individual athletes and isolate and reproduce the elements that led to consistent winning performance. What we did was then lend contemporary technology to the old Greek model, which held that there's three essential components to not just performance, but life in general, which were mind, body, and spirit. So we built out a body of work that we called mental fitness. We combined that with the various elements of physical fitness, and then importantly integrated the aspect of spirit. And when we talk about spirit, we don't mean religion, but we mean the human spirit. What's your passion? What's your belief system? What are the values that you bring to the whatever it is that you're doing, be it competition, career, or life? What we found was that at the intersection point where mind, body, and spirit came together, there was the possibility for consistent winning performance. We then expanded our model as we began to see the same thing everybody'd seen, which is we could take a group of players, put them together on a team, and the team would stink. So we built a body of work that we called team cohesion, expanded our model to mind, body, and team, and then went to work with all sorts of teams. We worked with national teams, Olympic teams, sports teams, military teams, and produced some extraordinary results. Now, one of my favorite stories, and I'll just give you one here, is these two women. They came to us back in the late 80s. They were amateur bicyclists, never raced a day in their lives. They went to a meeting of their bike club and saw a movie about the Ram, the race across America. In the movie, it was revealed that no two women had ever done the race on a tandem bike. They made the commitment that they wanted to do it. We trained them with our mind-body team methodologies for 6 months. Now, bear in mind, these are amateurs, so they had their day jobs. Race day comes, they left Santa Monica, California. They were in New York at City Hall in 10 days and 22 hours. What's important to us is that they still hold the women's record to this day. No one's been able to touch it. Now, surprisingly for us, all this work with sports caught the attention of the military. This was really not part of any big business plan that we had, and we found ourselves working almost exclusively with the Army for 3 years. A simple project here, I'm not going to read all this to you, you can see for yourselves, is that we took a group of 1,500 soldiers, we had them for 6 weeks, and this is what happened what things look like 6 months after we were gone. So not in the afterglow of some program, but 6 months down the road. And the results were rather extraordinary when reported to the gentleman pictured on the Newsweek cover, who was then our customer, General Ulmer. So at that point we paused, we said, well, what have we learned in all this? We saw that authentic learning has to be seen as the development of new competence, not the acquisition of new information. It was easy to get athletes to understand stuff. What wasn't so easy was getting them to do it, right? And what we saw was that, there's a big gap here. But what we realized is that, well, wait a minute, it's all just kind of old common sense. While the mind understands, and understanding can occur in an instant, in the end, it's the body that learns. And we want to think, well, of course, if you want to learn tennis or golf or something, obviously you have to train the body, and that takes time. But we somehow forget that that's true for anything. Your mind understands, but it's your body that learns. If you're committed, you can make literally anything happen. And when you put all those things together, we saw that transformational change, which is what we're about, as opposed to incremental change, was possible. Now, with that under our belts, we turned our attention to the corporate world, and this is going to get closer to home for many of you. And we have, over the last 15 years, built a body of work that we call commitment-based management. This is designed to be effective in the coordination era. Here's just a few of the folks that we've worked with in this, and I'll give you a couple quick stories. So AT&T came to us many years ago. Their consumer products division was losing $200 million a year. The board told them, you've got about 18 months to turn this around or we'll shut it down. We put 6,000 managers through an early version of our program. They, over the course of 48 months, went from losing $200 million to generating a cumulative total of $3 billion in profit. Not so bad. Capital One had a completely different issue. They experienced what's now known in case studies as explosive growth. They went from 600 employees to 17,000 in a little under 6 years. They went from 400,000 to 40 million customers in that same period of time. They did it all without acquiring anybody. Our job was to help them do the management development. So for 3 years, they basically outsourced all their management development to us. Point being, we know something about developing careers and organizations. And what we know is that there's no possibility of anyone developing anything if you don't know how to learn. Now, it seems obvious, but unfortunately, in today's world, particularly in most organizations, we really don't understand what it takes to learn. So let's look at, why am I saying that? What's going on here? Our claim, most training programs, whether they're live or online, don't deliver. If they did, we wouldn't need so many of them. And if they did, you wouldn't have to drag people to them. You'd have to keep them away from them. But that's not the case. So let's figure out why. Why? Fundamentally, because we've got 3 different definitions of learning, 2 of which don't support you very well at this point in life. So the first one is learning is seen as to become aware of, right? So until I read the book, I didn't know there was any such thing as plasma physics. Oh, well, isn't that interesting? Now I know this. That doesn't enable me to do anything except perhaps be slightly annoying at conversations. Then there's learning as to understand. So now I can dive into the study of plasma physics, or let's take a different example. I read Tiger Woods' book on golf, and in the book he explained how he does chip shots, and thought, wow, that's amazing. I'd love to do chip shots like Tiger Woods. So I read his book, but when I go out on the course, reading his book does not enable me to chip any better. Then there's learning, the kind of learning we're interested in, which is learning as in the development of new competence, a new capacity for action. That's what we're after, is a new capacity for action. Now, the dilemma that we're facing is that most training programs settle for providing you awareness and understanding when what you're after is the development of new competence. Now, here's the part that most folks don't want to talk about. The only way to get new competence is via practice. The only way, right? No amount of understanding ever produced competence because, as we said earlier, while the mind understands, and understanding can occur in an instant, in the end, it's the body that learns, and the body only learns through practice, period. Let's take an example that we're all familiar with, driving, right? Now, we could say, maybe with a little bit of license, so to speak, that you all know how to drive. How'd this happen? Well, early in life, you became aware of the practice of driving. People were driving around in cars all the time. When you were little, one of your parents probably let you sit on their lap and hold the steering wheel. But now you're 16, 17 years old, it's time to learn to drive, and the first thing they do is they give you a driver's manual so you can become aware of and understand the rules of the road, right? But no matter how much you read the manual, they're still not going to just give you a driver's license because you read the manual and took a test. No. The state, whatever state you're in, didn't say to you, okay, read the manual, then go visualize yourself driving and we'll give you these safe driving affirmations. I don't think so. They didn't say, read the manual and go to this Formula One movie and you'll get, all inspired about driving. They didn't say, go read the book and then attend this motivational seminar by NASCAR driver Jeff Gordon and he'll get you all fired up about driving. Probably not. And they certainly didn't say, oh, here's the 1-minute driver, or chicken soup for the driver's soul, or who moved my driver's license. Then if you read all that or do all that, we'll give you a driver's license. No, they did not. Instead, you had to go and work with an instructor and demonstrate competence in addition to understanding, and the only way you got competent was, say it, you practiced. You had to practice. Right? It's no different with anything else. Now today, you can get in the car, fire it up, head to work, and sometimes you got no idea how you even got there, right? Because your mind was elsewhere. If you go to any major city in the morning, you can drive down the freeways, and clearly people are talking on the phone. Unfortunately, some of them are also texting. I've been in traffic jams where guys are actually trying to read the newspaper and drive at the same time. Women are putting on their makeup. You have embodied the competence to the point where you don't any longer have to pay deep attention to it. That's what happens with practice. Now, the same thing's true with anything else, including how do you build new competence to enhance your career. Just listening to pieces of our program or reading all about them isn't going to do it. The program is designed to make and fulfill specific promises, and to do that, you need to make some promises to us. So let's talk about that. So the whole purpose of this program is to enable you, not us, but you, to be more successful. And to do that, collectively, we need to make a pact. Now, a pact is simply a set of promises that we make to each other. Now, here's the promises that we make to you. If you do this program, either with me or Sarah, we'll teach you a new, more powerful way of being in the world. Now, I know that sounds a little vague, but let's dive into it a little bit more. So we'll teach you how to make more clear, powerful choices. We'll show you how to declare your purpose in life and get you clear about what that is. We'll teach you new, more effective ways to communicate. We'll teach you what we call a centering practice that enables you to stay present in the moment, be calm in the midst of chaos, and mindful of the world around and, just as importantly, inside you. Right? Collectively, the net effect is that this is going to generate more self-confidence and esteem in you as you move in the world and produces that sense of presence that we said earlier employers are looking for. Collectively, that makes you more valuable, not just in your current job, but in any marketplace in the world. Now, I'm sure that all sounds interesting, but we need to be clear. None of that's going to happen if you don't fulfill and make and fulfill these promises to us. First is you have to be fully engaged. Right? We can't do it to you or for you, so that means you have to do the program. Don't just watch the videos and read about it. You actually have to do it. Do it means you do all the assignments. We're going to say more about that in a moment, but the short of this is the real work comes in doing the implementation assignments. Be open to new thinking and new perspectives. We're going to shake up some of the ways that you think about yourself, the world, and even reality. You have to set aside your historical cynicism. I know many of you have looked at or attempted things in the past and they haven't worked. Hopefully because of our little talk about learning, you now understand why. Right? But your cynicism isn't going to help. We'll be here, ask for help if you need it, and then expect something extraordinary to happen. And if you do all that, I promise you'll be successful. So, if you're willing to make and keep these promises, you will get the results. Big, important question, do we have a pact? Is it a deal? When you say, well, that makes a lot of sense, but exactly what is it that we're going to do? Funny you should ask. So here's a very simple map of what the program looks like. As you probably read before you decided to watch the webinar, the program contains 20 modules. They range in lengths. I think the shortest one's like 5 or 10 minutes. The longest one's 45. The whole purpose, though, is that each of them builds on the previous one, and we've taken the program and divided it into 4 sections. It should take you roughly 2 weeks to complete each section, and once you sign up and decide to go for the whole thing, you will get a new section every 2 weeks. We're not going to give it to you all at once because there's no prize for getting through it faster. In fact, that's actually going to get in your way if you try and rush through it. You want to take the time to do all the assignments as they're set out because it's in the assignments that you actually build the new practices. And hopefully by now you've got that that's what we're all about. So you can see for yourself terminology here that I'm sure is all familiar. You've heard all these terms before. What you haven't done, though, is really get into what do each of these things mean in a practical sense and what's our interpretation of them, and then more importantly, how do you bring them to life for yourself? Once you've moved through all these 4 sections and you've completed all the work, I promise you will be a different human being and you will be much more valuable in the marketplace. So there's our summary. Jim, what do we got happening over here in the Q&A box?
Thanks, Chris. That was wonderful. And we've had a lot of people chiming in here with their questions. So I've been taking notes. I wrote down some of these questions. We have a really good question here to begin with. We've got Casey from Brooklyn wants to know what's the difference between practices and habits, and what do you really mean when you talk about practices, Chris?
Good question, Casey. There has, of course, over the last many years been all this talk about developing habits and habits of highly effective people and all this sort of stuff. We take a little different spin on all this. See, in the world we come from, which is performance in the military, frankly, habits are for junkies. And in those performance worlds, they get you killed because it makes you predictable. You either lose or nothing good happens in a combat situation when you've got habits. Practices are more conscious, right? So what we're wanting to do is develop your capacity to be aware of what you're doing and why you're doing it. Now, without going into a whole lot of detail here, there's a little 4-box grid you can think of in terms of what kind of habits. There's conscious and unconscious and generative and what we call degenerative. And what we're wanting to do is build more conscious generative practices. Now I got myself doing it. Conscious generative practices in you so that you can move through the world in a completely different way. And as you do that over time, eventually some of them become unconscious, but that doesn't mean that you're not mindful about them. I hope that helps, but the point of this is the whole program, and the reason that it takes time is we're building these new practices in you, new ways for you to move in the world.
All right, perfect. That looks like he answered his question. Casey says thank you. Juan from Seattle wants to know how this program is different from everything else that's out there.
Well, Juan, hopefully you got most of that in listening to the webinar. The central points are this. We're about building new practices, not about giving you understanding. We don't traffic in simplistic tips and techniques or motivational pablum. We're all about how do we shape you into a new, better, enhanced version of you. So this program is not, oh boy, 40 minutes and your life is different. No, this is 2 months and your life is different. The reason for that is simple. It's taken you years to become the one that you are. Right? And the notion that you're going to somehow transform that or make some big difference in that in 40 minutes or even listening to 2 days of seminar, frankly, should be insulting. And I can tell you, based on my experience, it certainly isn't going to happen. You might get aware of things that you want to change or aware of new ways that you want to be, but awareness is not the same thing as competence, right? So we're going to keep beating this drum. You've got to build the new practices, and that's what separates this program from everything else that's out there. It's all about building practices.
All right, thanks, Chris. We've got Susan from San Diego. She wants to know why we're not giving away some of the program like other people do.
Susan, the bargain hunter. That's right. It's the internet. Everybody wants something for free. Well, yeah, we don't do that. And the reason is pretty simple. We know that what we do works. When we make this program or the same body of work available to our corporate clients on a live basis, they're paying roughly $5,000 per person for this program. We've taken it, put it into an online version, made it available to you for a fraction of that cost. But no, it's not free, right? We've spent 25 years developing it. That has a lot of value. If you know the basics of economics, there's the wonderful adage, you get what you pay for. So I'm sure there's lots of things you can get out there for free, but they will definitely fall into the tips, techniques, category. That's not what we do. Now, what we have done is set it up so that you can do the first section of this program, which is the first 4 modules, for $20. Right? That's, what is that, a $250 value? And our basic assumption about it is simple. If you're not willing to invest $20 in yourself, you spend more than that in Starbucks in a few days, then you're not really serious about developing your career. And then, frankly, this isn't the place for you. There's all sorts of stuff out there. Let's just use that word, that's free or $9.95 or $19.95. If you're serious about building your career, you're going to want to make a serious investment of your time, energy, resources, and money.
All right, thanks, Chris. Let's see, we've got Elizabeth from Denver, and she is asking, why does the program cost so much?
Well, I think we kind of answered that with the last question. The thing you want to look at here when it comes to economics, it's all relative. So it costs so much in relationship to what? In relationship to doing nothing? Well, yeah, $997 is expensive in relationship to nothing. In relationship to what it would cost if you wanted to do it through a company, it's very inexpensive. In relationship to some of the other stuff that's in the marketplace, you can go hire a career coach or a counselor and spend a lot more than the price on this program. You can go online and get stuff for $19.95 that you, frankly, I don't think are probably going to get too much value out of. So we've priced this at what we think is reasonable. And if you look at your career, let's say, because I don't know, was it Elizabeth, did you say?
Yeah, Elizabeth.
Elizabeth, I don't know how old Elizabeth is, but if Elizabeth, let's just make this up. Let's just say you're 30 years old. You take this program. And as a result, you get a promotion a year, 6 months, maybe as much as 2 years sooner than you might have otherwise. Well, if you do a trajectory and what that does to your lifetime earnings, the math is pretty astounding. And then this conversation of did this cost a lot goes away real quickly. Now, I'm not going to sit here and promise you that you're going to get a promotion. That would be preposterous. But I will promise that you will be more valuable, and the value that you get will be way beyond what you pay for it.
All right. Thanks, Chris. And she thanks you too for that answer. Thank you, Elizabeth. Finally, we have Rashid from, I'm not sure how to pronounce this, Tupolo.
Jim, you got to get out of the house more often. I believe that's Tupelo.
Tupelo.
Which, as far as I know, is in Mississippi.
Okay. And he wants to know, what is the difference between the men and the women's programs?
Good question. The short answer is, well, nothing much. As I said earlier, I do the men's program. Sarah does the women's program. What we found simply is that some people are more comfortable listening to a man or a woman, but the reality is the content is essentially identical. I spend a lot of time saying he. She spends a lot of time saying she, but other than that, there, for the most part, isn't any real difference. Now, truth be told, Sarah's much better looking than I am, so if you're one of the visual learners, you may want to do the program with her, but you're going to get essentially or exactly the same thing from either version.
All right. Well, that's pretty much going to be the end of our time here. We've actually run a little over our time. So thank you, Chris, so much for taking the time to explain to us about the Elite Performance Program.
You're welcome. Hope that was helpful for people.
All right, everyone. As you see on your screen now, we have a great offer. $20 will get you started with instant access to the first section of the Elite Performance Program, either the men's or the women's version. If you click on one of the program links below, you can register for the program and get instant access right away. So again, thank you all so much, and we look forward to the next one.